Most people get this completely wrong, and if you miss this, you will keep repeating the same painful pattern with the same kind of person in a different face. So listen closely. This is not about tricks. It is not about making someone chase you with games, silence, or fake confidence. It is about something far more powerful and far more rare. The moment you stop handing your peace to someone who only shows up when it suits them, the whole energy changes, quietly, deeply, in ways they feel before they can even explain it. And if you have ever loved someone who kept you close just enough to keep you hoping, but never close enough to make you feel safe, then this will hit hard, because what shifts them is not your effort, not your over-explaining, not your patience. It is the moment your energy stops revolving around their distance. That is when the ground starts moving under their feet. Stay with me, because the part most people never understand is exactly the part that changes everything. People often think an avoidant person is cold, unreachable, or simply built without the same emotional depth as everyone else. That is the story many hurt people tell themselves after giving real care and receiving mixed signals in return. But the deeper truth is not that they feel nothing. It is that they protect themselves through distance, control, and emotional restraint. They do not usually move closer when love is offered openly. Very often, they step back. Not always because they do not care, but because closeness can wake up fear. To them, dependence can feel dangerous. Emotional need can feel like pressure. So when you keep offering more understanding, more reassurance, more patience, and more access, they may not experience it as safety the way you hoped. They may experience it as weight. The more available you become, the calmer they feel in the pattern, because the connection starts working on their terms. They know you will still be there. They know the door is still open. They know the emotional center stays with them. And when that becomes predictable, your presence can stop feeling precious and start feeling guaranteed. This is where many people get trapped and never even see it happening. An avoidant dynamic is rarely loud in the beginning. It does not always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like inconsistency mixed with charm, warmth, then distance, interest, then silence, a deep conversation, then a strange withdrawal that leaves you replaying every word in your head. And because you care, you try to fix the confusion. You explain your feelings more clearly. You become more patient. You tell yourself that if you just love in a steadier, softer, wiser way, eventually they will feel safe enough to meet you there. But this is exactly where the pattern tightens, because when one person keeps reaching and the other keeps regulating the distance, the balance quietly shifts. They begin to hold the emotional upper hand without even saying it. You start watching their tone, their timing, their mood, their replies. You begin adjusting yourself just to keep the connection from slipping. And once that happens, the relationship is no longer built on mutuality. It is built on emotional management. Watch this carefully, because this is where many strong people slowly lose themselves while calling it love. And the painful part is, they do it sincerely. What unsettles an avoidant is not drama, not intensity, not a speech about what they did wrong. What unsettles them most is calm absence joined with self-respect. It is when your energy stops chasing without turning bitter. No performance, no punishment, no long announcement, just a real inner shift that says, I am no longer building my world around whether you choose me or not. That is when something changes, because now the distance is no longer being managed only by them. The old emotional supply is interrupted. The reassurance they silently relied on is no longer arriving in the same form. And when that happens, their system often reacts. Not always right away, not dramatically. Sometimes the reaction is delayed, quiet, internal. They may look normal on the outside, even detached, but inside they begin to feel a loss of certainty. Why is this different now? Why does the silence feel heavier? Why does this connection no longer feel safely parked in the background? These questions do not always come with tears or confessions. Often they arrive as restlessness, curiosity, memory, and a growing awareness that the person they assumed would remain available is no longer emotionally waiting in the same way. This is the paradox many people never expect. Avoidant people often fear real abandonment more than they fear intimacy, but only when that loss becomes believable. As long as you keep proving your loyalty, explaining your intentions, and staying emotionally on standby, they may never fully feel the possibility of losing you. Your presence feels permanent, so your value becomes muted inside the pattern. But when you stop negotiating your worth, when you stop offering emotional labor without reciprocity, something much deeper begins to move. They start noticing your absence in strange little moments, a pause in the day, a message that never came, a softness that used to be there and now is not offered so freely. And because avoidant people often mute emotional impact in the moment, they may not register the loss instantly. It catches up later, in memory, in contrast, in the silence after the noise is gone. This is where attachment can begin to form in a way they do not fully understand, not because you manipulated them, but because you stopped carrying the emotional weight for both people. That difference matters. This is not about making someone suffer. It is about no longer abandoning yourself just to keep a fragile bond alive. The hardest part comes next, and this is where most people accidentally break the shift. The moment they pull back and finally choose their peace, they feel the urge to explain it, to send one last message, to clarify the boundary, to make sure the other person understands what changed and why. But that explanation often gives the old pattern fresh oxygen, because now your attention is again circling them. Your emotional focus is back in their hands. Real change usually lands more powerfully when it is lived instead of announced. When your timing changes, when your availability becomes intentional, when your voice stays warm but your center stays firm, when you stop reacting to every small movement and start responding from self-respect instead of fear. That kind of steadiness is deeply unsettling to someone who is used to being the more detached one. They may not admit it, they may even test it, but they feel it. They notice that the old access is no longer automatic. They notice that your energy is no longer rushing to repair every gap. And once they begin to question their access to you, the emotional balance starts to reverse. This is the moment most people miss, so do not skip it. Silence becomes powerful here, but only if it is clean. Not the silence of resentment, not the silence of hidden revenge, not the silence that secretly hopes to force a reaction. I mean the silence of someone who is no longer trying to squeeze closeness from someone who cannot meet them halfway. That kind of calm distance cannot be argued with. Words can be dismissed, explanations can be twisted, emotions can be minimized, but grounded absence backed by self-respect has a different weight. It forces inward reflection, and inward reflection is uncomfortable for someone who has spent years staying busy, staying distant, staying in control. They may start replaying moments, rereading old conversations, wondering whether they misread your patience as weakness, wondering whether your presence brought them more safety than they allowed themselves to admit. Then come the small signs. A random message, a casual check-in, a memory brought up for no clear reason, a little more softness in their tone, a little more effort in their timing. It may look small on the surface, but underneath it means something has shifted. So keep watching, because this is where people get tempted to rush back in and undo everything they finally learned. When they begin leaning in again, it is rarely direct. Do not expect a dramatic speech, instant vulnerability, or some sudden transformation into the perfect partner. Usually what returns first is hesitation mixed with need, more consistency, but still caution, more curiosity, but still restraint. They may stay in the conversation longer. They may ask slightly more personal questions. They may disappear less often, or come back sooner, or show concern in ways that seem almost hidden under humor or casual words. These are not always random moments. Very often they are tests. Not always conscious ones, but nervous system tests all the same. Is it still safe to lean in? Will closeness cost me control? If I open the door a little, will the old version of you rush in and carry the whole relationship again? And every time you stay calm, every time you do not panic, every time you do not overgive just because they showed a little warmth, you teach the dynamic something new. You show that closeness can exist without desperation, that care can exist without self-erasure, that warmth does not have to come with pressure. This is when they begin to feel something unfamiliar. Effort, and effort when it is real, can turn into investment. That is the deeper shift. Not control, not domination, not making somebody emotionally dependent just to soothe your ego. The real shift is exposure, They are no longer protected by the old certainty that you will always absorb the imbalance and still remain. Now they have to feel their own uncertainty, their own curiosity, their own fear of losing something meaningful, and that can grow into genuine attachment when met with steadiness instead of chaos. They may begin to miss you in a more real way. Your presence may start affecting their mood more than they expected. Your absence may carry more emotional weight than they are comfortable admitting. They may think about you during ordinary parts of the day. They may compare the calm they felt with you to the noise they feel elsewhere, and this is why you must be careful, because once the emotional gravity starts shifting, it becomes tempting to use that influence to settle old pain, get reassurance, or make them feel what you once felt. Do not do that. The moment power turns into payback, the whole thing becomes toxic again. Real strength is quieter than that. It does not need revenge. It does not need a win. It simply stays rooted and lets truth reveal itself. What changes most in the end is not just them, it is you. You stop waiting between hope and anxiety. You stop reading silence as a reflection of your worth. You stop shrinking your standards to keep a connection alive. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. Your body becomes quieter. Your mind stops rehearsing conversations that never happen. Your energy returns to your own life. And that is when everything opens in a new way. You laugh more easily. You think more clearly. You feel less pulled into the emotional weather of someone who has not yet learned how to love in a steady way. Ironically, this is often when they feel the shift most strongly, not because you are trying to prove a point, but because the truth is now visible. You are no longer available on emotional standby. You are no longer living in reaction to their inconsistency, and that is powerful in a way no performance ever could be. Because people who are used to emotional control can feel the difference between someone who is grasping and someone who is grounded. One feels easy to manage, the other feels impossible to ignore. If this is hitting home, stay with me, because this final layer matters more than all the rest. The boundary you build here is the line you cannot afford to cross again. The moment you start over-explaining your feelings, begging for clarity, bargaining with your needs, or lowering your standards just to keep somebody from slipping away, the old pattern begins rebuilding itself. Not because you failed, but because the strength you found was never about being distant or mysterious. It was about self-respect. It was about remembering that love should not require you to abandon yourself. Avoidant people do not always consciously seek power, but they are highly sensitive to energy. They can feel when someone is centered and when someone is grasping. When you return to old habits, their system often relaxes back into the imbalance. The urgency fades, the attachment loosens, the movement stalls. So this is not about becoming cold. It is about staying rooted in the version of yourself that does not beg to be chosen. The version that knows connection should add peace, not drain it. The version that understands real intimacy is mutual, not managed. And once you truly see that, you cannot unsee it. That awareness changes every relationship you step into from this point forward, whether this person stays or not. In the end, the truth is simple. Even if living it is hard, people do not change because you outplay them. They change when reality meets them, when your energy no longer cushions their avoidance, when your presence is no longer guaranteed at the cost of your peace, when they finally feel contrast, not pressure, not force, contrast, the contrast between being cared for and losing access to that care, the contrast between your old over-availability and your new grounded presence, the contrast between shallow comfort and real emotional safety. Some will rise to meet that truth, some will not, some will grow, some will leave. But either way, you win something greater than their attention. You reclaim yourself. You become someone who is open but not desperate, warm but not chasing, loving but not self-abandoning. And that energy is felt by everyone, not just avoidant people. It is felt by secure people too, by those who are actually ready, by those who do not need to be convinced to care. So if you take one thing from this, let it be this: you were never meant to beg for love, perform for love, or shrink for love. The moment you stop doing that, everything changes. Not because you became harder, but because you became whole.